The airport was buzzing with noise that morning. People rushed through the terminal, dragging suitcases, holding coffee cups, and looking tired but excited. Among them was a quiet teenage boy walking beside his mother. He wasn't talking much, just keeping his eyes low and holding on to a small black backpack. His mother walked close to him, checking their tickets again and again, trying to make sure they were at the right gate. They were flying across the country to visit family. For his mother, it was a rare trip. She didn't get to take time off work often. For the boy, it was his first long flight without his father there. His father was a pilot, always flying to different places, and the boy admired him deeply. But he rarely talked about it. He was shy and never liked to draw attention to himself. When they reached their gate, most passengers were already lined up. The boy quietly took a seat while his mother went to check with the gate agent. A few rows away, a group of well-dressed men in suits were laughing loudly, their voices filling the waiting area. They looked like businessmen, confident, loud, the kind of people who liked being noticed. When the boy's mother came back, she smiled softly. "Everything's on time," she said. He nodded, still watching the planes through the big glass window. His eyes followed the luggage carts, the blinking lights, and the people moving around on the runway. Something about it always amazed him. Planes were like giant birds to him, machines that carried stories, dreams, and families from one place to another. Soon, boarding started. The boy and his mother were in Group 3. When their turn came, he gave the flight attendant their tickets and quietly said, "Thank you." The woman smiled, noticing how polite he was. "Enjoy your flight, sweetheart," she said kindly. Inside the plane, people were already filling the overhead bins, trying to find their seats. The boy looked at his ticket and followed the numbers. They had seats near the back of the plane, right across from the loud group of men who had been at the gate. As soon as they saw the boy walking down the aisle, one of them nudged the other and grinned. "Look, it's the little nervous guy from the gate," one whispered, just loud enough for others to hear. The boy didn't respond. He just sat down, placed his backpack under the seat, and buckled his belt. His mother noticed the look on his face. "Don't worry about them," she whispered. "Just focus on the trip. You'll love the view when we're above the clouds." He nodded and smiled weakly. The flight attendants moved around, helping passengers store their bags and checking seat belts. The boy sat still, glancing around quietly. He could hear the businessmen talking loudly about money, deals, and their weekend plans. Every now and then, one of them looked over and smirked, whispering something that made the others laugh. When the engines started, the boy straightened up. The sound of the plane coming to life gave him a strange comfort. He had grown up around it. His father often talked about the beauty of flying, the patience it took, the calmness, and how a good pilot never let fear take over. The boy remembered those words and repeated them quietly in his mind as the plane began to move. As the aircraft rolled toward the runway, one of the businessmen leaned toward another and said, "Look at that kid gripping the armrest already. Poor guy's probably terrified." They laughed again. The boy's mother heard them but stayed quiet. She looked at her son and squeezed his hand. "You're fine," she said softly. "You know more about planes than half the people here." The boy smiled a little, still not saying anything. He liked flying. He always did. But he didn't like attention, and having people watch him made his stomach twist. The plane sped down the runway, lifting into the air. As soon as it rose above the clouds, the view outside the window changed into a sea of white and blue. The boy looked out in awe, his face glowing in the sunlight. The world looked peaceful from up here, so far away from noise and judgment. Meanwhile, the businessmen kept talking. One of them ordered a drink from the flight attendant and started joking about how people like that kid shouldn't travel alone if they can't handle it. His voice wasn't exactly quiet, and a few nearby passengers turned their heads with disapproving looks. But the men didn't care. They thought they were being funny. The boy's mother gently pulled a small photo from her purse. It was a picture of her husband in uniform, smiling in front of a plane. She handed it to her son. "He'd be proud of you," she said. "You always sit so calmly." "Just like him." The boy smiled and nodded. "He said calm people make the best pilots," he whispered. A flight attendant passed by, checking on passengers. When she stopped beside them, she smiled at the boy. "Everything okay here?" she asked kindly. The boy nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you." She smiled again, noticing the kindness in his tone. As she walked away, she glanced back once more. as if she recognized something familiar in him. The men across the aisle started another round of laughter. One of them leaned closer to the boy's mother and said jokingly, "You might want to tell him not to look so scared. Makes the rest of us nervous." The woman turned slowly toward him, her voice calm but firm. "He's not scared," she said. "He just doesn't find jokes like that funny." The man raised his eyebrows, caught off guard by her tone. He gave a forced smile and leaned back, pretending to focus on his magazine. The boy looked at his mother, grateful she spoke up, but she only gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Ignore them," she whispered. "You know who you are." Time passed slowly as the plane cruised above the clouds. The boy took out a small model plane from his backpack and held it carefully in his hands. It was an old toy his father had given him years ago, one that looked just like the aircraft his dad used to fly when he started his career. He traced the wings with his fingers and smiled softly. The sound of the engines filled his ears, a steady hum that reminded him of home. One of the businessmen noticed the toy and chuckled. Oh, he brought his little plane with him. "Cute," he said sarcastically. His friends laughed again. The boy looked away, pretending not to hear. But deep down it stung a little. Not because of what they said, but because they didn't understand. To him, flying wasn't just a game, it was part of who he was. His mother leaned closer and said quietly, "Don't let them make you feel small. People laugh at what they don't understand." He nodded. "I know," he whispered. The rest of the flight went on quietly for them. The men eventually got busy with their laptops, and the boy spent the time watching clouds drift by. At one point, he noticed how the light from the sunset painted the sky orange and gold. It was beautiful, something only people who looked closely could appreciate. His mother dozed off for a while, and he sat there, lost in thought. He imagined what it must feel like to be the one in the cockpit, guiding everyone safely through the air. He wanted to be like his father one day, not because of the uniform or the admiration, but because of the calm strength his father carried. As the cabin lights dimmed and people began settling in, one of the flight attendants made a friendly announcement about turbulence ahead. The businessmen tensed up, their laughter fading as the plane shook gently. The boy, however, stayed perfectly calm. He had heard his father explain how turbulence worked many times. He even smiled a little, almost comforted by the familiar movement. One of the men noticed and frowned. "Huh, guess he's not so scared after all," he muttered. His friend shrugged, pretending not to care, but their tone had changed. When the plane steadied again, the boy looked out the window once more. The stars had begun to appear, tiny lights scattered across the sky. He took a slow breath and whispered to himself, "Dad's flying somewhere out there right now." He didn't know that soon. Everyone on that plane would know exactly who his father was. But for now, he was just a quiet boy sitting in his seat, lost in the clouds, carrying a secret that would soon change how everyone saw him. The soft hum of the engines filled the cabin. The boy sat quietly, still looking out at the clouds. His mother had drifted back to sleep, her head resting against the window. Around them, the lights were dimmed, and most passengers were lost in their own worlds. Some reading, some watching movies, others just waiting for time to pass. The businessmen across the aisle, however, were still talking. Their voices had dropped a little, but every few minutes a laugh or a loud comment broke the calm. One of them was scrolling through his phone, showing pictures to the others. "We should have flown first class," one said. "Would have been worth it. No crying kids, no nervous passengers." The boy heard that and glanced their way, wondering if they were still talking about him. He tried not to care, but something about the tone always made him uneasy. They weren't cruel exactly, just the kind of people who found humor in putting others down. The flight attendant came by with a tray of drinks and snacks. When she reached the boys' row, she smiled warmly. "Would you like something to drink, honey?" she asked. The boy looked at his mother, still sleeping, then said softly, "Just water, please." The woman poured him a cup and handed it over. "You're very polite," she said with a kind smile. "That's rare these days." He smiled back shyly and said thank you. She nodded and moved on, offering drinks to the men across the aisle. As she left, one of them looked over at the boy. "Well-mannered little guy, huh?" he said with a grin that didn't seem friendly. The others chuckled. "Probably one of those kids whose mom still packs his lunch for him." The boy didn't respond. He took a sip of his water and looked out the window again. The sky was beginning to darken now, the sun setting far away on the horizon. The clouds turned soft shades of orange and purple. It was peaceful, and he tried to focus on that instead of the people around him. A few minutes later, the captain's voice came through the intercom. His voice was calm, deep, and steady. "Good evening, folks. This is your captain speaking. We've just passed 30,000 feet and should be arriving about 20 minutes later than expected, due to strong headwinds. Nothing to worry about, just a slight delay. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The boy looked up as soon as he heard that voice. He recognized the calm tone instantly. His father used to sound just like that when talking about flying. Something about the rhythm, the quiet control always made him feel safe. The men across the aisle didn't seem impressed. One of them sighed loudly. "A delay? Great, I knew this airline was terrible." Another shrugged. "As long as the pilot knows what he's doing, I don't care," he said. Then he smirked and added, "Hope it's not one of those rookie captains. Don't want to end up in the ocean." They laughed again, but their laughter made a few people around them uncomfortable. The boy noticed one woman giving them a sharp look before turning away. The boy's mother stirred awake at the sound of the captain's voice. "What did I miss?" she asked quietly. "Nothing," the boy said softly. "Just the captain talking," she smiled. "You always listen so closely when they do." He nodded. "I like how calm they sound. Dad says that's the most important part of being a pilot, staying calm." His mother looked at him with gentle eyes. "He's right," she said. "Calm people make the best decisions." The plane flew smoothly for a while. The cabin lights were dim, and outside the window the sky had turned a deep blue sprinkled with a few visible stars. The boy leaned his head back, still holding his small model plane. A little turbulence began to shake the cabin. Not much, just enough to make a few passengers tense up. One of the businessmen gripped his armrest and frowned. "What was that?" "Relax," another said, pretending to be calm but sounding nervous. "Just air pockets." The boy sat quietly, unbothered. He even smiled faintly, remembering how his father once explained that turbulence was just like waves in the ocean. Invisible but harmless. The seatbelt sign came on, and the flight attendant's calm voice followed. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and keep your seatbelts fastened until the captain turns off the sign." The boy's mother gently tightened her belt and looked at him. "You okay?" He nodded. "It's fine, Mom, it's normal." Across the aisle, the men were less calm. One made a nervous joke, but his laugh came out shaky. "Guess we spoke too soon," he muttered. The boy glanced at them for a moment. He could tell they were trying to act tough, but fear was written all over their faces. It was strange how the loudest people suddenly became quiet when things felt uncertain. After a few minutes, the turbulence stopped and the cabin steadied again. People relaxed, and the usual sounds of chatter and movies filled the air once more. The flight attendant passed by to check if everyone was okay. When she reached the boys' row, she smiled again. "How are you two doing?" she asked. "We're fine," the mother said kindly. The boy nodded. "Everything's okay." The attendant smiled warmly. "You're a brave one, aren't you?" she said. Didn't even flinch during the bumps. The boy gave a small smile. "My dad says planes are safest in the sky," he replied quietly. The attendant's eyes softened. "Your dad sounds like a wise man," she said. The men overheard that, and one of them chuckled. "Yeah, sure," he said under his breath. "Let's just hope the pilot up there knows that too." The boy ignored them again, but his mother's expression hardened slightly. She looked at the men and said softly, "You know, sometimes it's better to just enjoy the ride instead of complaining about it." The men exchanged looks, clearly surprised that she spoke up. One gave a short laugh and said, "Just making conversation, ma'am." She turned back to her son and said nothing more. A while later, dinner service began. The smell of food filled the cabin. The flight attendants moved slowly through the aisles, handing out trays and drinks. The boy and his mother got simple meals. The men across from them started complaining again, this time about the food, the seats, and even the temperature. The boy picked at his food quietly, listening to them. He couldn't understand how people could find so many things to be upset about in a place where they were literally flying through the sky. As the plane continued its long journey, the lights dimmed again and most people began to sleep. The boy couldn't. He watched the soft glow of the wing lights outside the window. His mother rested beside him, breathing softly. He thought about his father again, how he'd sometimes come home late at night after a long flight, still wearing his uniform, smelling faintly of jet fuel and coffee. He'd tell stories about the sky, about sunsets above the clouds, and about passengers he never even saw but always protected. The boy imagined himself there, in the cockpit, guiding the plane through the stars. Maybe one day, he thought, he'd do that too. The quiet moment was broken when the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be passing through a small patch of rough air, so please remain seated. We'll be out of it shortly." The businessmen tensed up again. One muttered something about bad luck, and another said, "Maybe we should have taken a different flight." But the boy just smiled faintly. That voice, it didn't sound worried at all. It sounded confident, like someone who had everything under control. After a few gentle bumps, the plane steadied once again. The boy's mother woke up and smiled when she saw him awake. "Still can't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "Just thinking," he said. "About what?" "About Dad," he replied, "and how he's probably somewhere up there flying another plane tonight." His mother smiled softly. "He'd love that you're thinking of him." The boy looked back out the window. "I just wish people knew what flying really meant," he said quietly. "It's not just about sitting on a plane. It's about trust, about people working together." She nodded. "You're right," she said gently. "Most people don't think about it that way." He turned back toward the aisle. The men who had mocked him earlier were now sitting silently, their confidence gone. He wondered what they would think if they knew who his father was. The man flying planes far above them, the one other pilots looked up to. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He just leaned his head back, listening to the hum of the engines, feeling that familiar calm again. He didn't know it yet, but soon, everyone on that plane, including the men who laughed at him, would hear his father's name spoken over the intercom. And in that moment, everything would change. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, a steady, calming rhythm that the boy had learned to find comforting. He still sat quietly, watching the clouds drift below like cotton, endless and soft. The sky had turned a deeper shade of blue, dotted with tiny stars, and the wing of the plane glimmered faintly in the fading light. Everything seemed peaceful, almost as if the world had paused, except for the occasional shuffle of passengers or the soft beep of electronic devices. The men across the aisle were restless again, though quieter than before. They whispered among themselves, complaining about the flight and joking about delays. "I can't believe this," one said, rubbing his temples. "We paid good money to be delayed." "This is ridiculous," the boy ignored them. He took out his small model plane again, turning it carefully in his hands. The smooth plastic felt reassuring. His father had given it to him years ago, and it had become a kind of talisman. When he held it, he felt close to his dad, even when miles apart. "Didn't he ever tell you turbulence is normal?" his mother asked softly, noticing the tension in the air. He shook his head, still staring at the wing. "He said it's like waves in the ocean. Nothing to be scared of?" "Exactly," she said, squeezing his hand. "That's why you stay calm. Most people forget that." A few moments later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. This time it was slightly different. Not urgent, not alarming, but calm and steady. The way someone speaks when they have complete control of a situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've encountered some stronger winds ahead, but we are managing everything carefully. We expect a slightly longer flight time, but nothing to worry about. Your safety is our priority." The cabin fell silent for a moment. Most passengers just nodded and settled back into their seats. But the men across the aisle frowned. One of them muttered something about airlines always exaggerating delays, while the others laughed nervously. The boy didn't react. He had grown up listening to his father's calm instructions over the radio, hearing the same tone repeated countless times. It had always made him feel safe. He leaned back, taking slow breaths, letting the rhythm of the plane soothe him. Minutes passed, and the turbulence intensified slightly. The plane rocked gently, enough to make a few passengers tense, but not enough to alarm anyone. The boy's mother leaned over and whispered, "See? Everything is fine, just like your father always says." He nodded, holding the small plane a little tighter. His eyes were calm, but inside he felt a quiet excitement. He knew that soon, everyone would see a side of him that no one expected. The flight attendants moved carefully through the aisle, checking that everyone was buckled in and comfortable. One of them paused beside the boy and smiled. "Everything okay here?" she asked kindly. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." She looked at him for a moment longer than usual, as if she recognized something familiar, something that made her pause. Then she moved on, helping other passengers. The businessmen continued to whisper among themselves, their earlier confidence fading. One of them noticed the boy holding the model plane and smirked. "Still playing with your toy?" he asked sarcastically. The boy didn't answer. He simply set it carefully on his lap and continued looking out the window, watching the sun dip lower on the horizon. The sky was turning deep shades of orange and purple, and for a moment, the plane seemed suspended between two worlds, the chaos of the ground below and the quiet beauty above. Then, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. This time it was different, clearer, stronger, and carrying a tone of pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain, last name. I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone special on board today. My son, who is flying with us for the first time. He is sitting in the cabin quietly, learning the ways of the skies just as I did at his age." The words hung in the air. The boy froze, his hand gripping the model plane tightly. He felt his heart beat faster, a mix of pride and nervousness. The passengers around him were silent. Some looked around, trying to understand who the captain was talking about. The businessmen across the aisle froze as well. Their mouths opened slightly, but no words came out. They had been mocking the quiet boy, laughing at his shy demeanor, and now they realized that the boy they had underestimated was someone very important. The boy's mother smiled softly, her eyes shining with pride. She reached over and touched his hand gently. "See, I told you people often judge without knowing the truth," she whispered. He nodded slowly, feeling a warmth in his chest. His father's voice was always steady, confident, and kind, and now everyone on the plane could hear it, even if they didn't yet understand the connection fully. The captain continued, his voice calm and controlled. "I'm proud of how he sits quietly observing and learning. One day, he will understand the responsibilities and joys of flying, and I know he will make a fine pilot himself. For now, I ask all passengers to extend their kindness and respect to him as he experiences his first flight." The boy could feel the eyes of everyone in the cabin turned toward him. He looked down at his hands holding the model plane, feeling both shy and proud at the same time. The men across the aisle avoided his gaze, their earlier mockery replaced with awkward silence. The cabin was quiet now. People whispered softly to each other, pointing discreetly toward the boy, but no one laughed. The mood had shifted completely. The boy's mother leaned closer, whispering, "He's proud of you. I hope you feel proud too," he nodded. "I do," he whispered back, his voice barely audible. "I really do." For the first time that flight, the boy felt seen, not for being quiet or shy, but for being exactly who he was. He didn't need to be loud or boastful. The truth about him was now out, and it changed everything. The men across the aisle shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them muttered something to the other, trying to regain composure, but it came out weak and forced. They realized that their judgment had been completely wrong. The boy wasn't afraid. He wasn't weak, and he certainly wasn't ordinary. The flight continued smoothly, and the boy began to relax again. He leaned back, looking out at the darkening sky. Stars were beginning to sparkle above. Tiny lights scattered across the vast, endless sky. The plane glided above the clouds, calm and steady, as if nothing in the world could disturb its path. The boy's thoughts wandered to his father. He imagined him in the cockpit somewhere, guiding another plane safely through the night. The pride he felt wasn't just for being mentioned. It was for understanding the responsibility that came with flying, for knowing the patience, calmness, and courage it took. The flight attendants moved down the aisle again, offering blankets and checking on passengers. One of them paused beside the boy, giving him a small nod of acknowledgement. "You're handling this very well," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Thank you," he replied. The men across the aisle avoided eye contact now, their earlier arrogance gone. One muttered something about learning not to judge people too quickly. The boy didn't respond. He didn't need to. His calm presence spoke louder than words ever could. As the plane continued, the captain made a few more routine announcements, updating passengers on the estimated arrival time and weather conditions. Every time his father's voice came over the intercom, The boy felt a mixture of pride and comfort. He knew that no matter what, the plane was safe and he was learning from the best. The cabin lights dimmed once more, and a quiet settled over the passengers. Some slept, some watched movies, and some simply stared out the window at the endless sky. The boy held his small plane tightly, feeling a quiet joy. He had been mocked earlier, underestimated, and ignored. But now the truth was out, and the world had a different perspective. The men across the aisle occasionally glanced at him, their expressions softening with respect. Though a hint of embarrassment remained, they had learned a lesson without the need for confrontation. Sometimes quiet strength and patience spoke louder than any words. The boy leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. He didn't sleep, but he felt calm, steady, and proud. His mother rested beside him, holding his hand lightly. The plane continued to glide through the night, each mile bringing them closer to their destination, and the boy felt more certain than ever that he could face the world with quiet confidence. Soon, he realized everyone on this flight would see not just the quiet boy, but the son of the pilot, a boy who carried the calm strength and wisdom he had inherited, waiting for the right moment to show it. The journey was far from over, but in that quiet, peaceful cabin, the boy understood something important. Sometimes people judge too quickly, but truth always had a way of revealing itself, quietly and clearly, like the steady hum of engines carrying them safely through the sky. The cabin had fallen into a quiet hum. Most passengers were either resting or staring out at the endless darkness, dotted with tiny lights far below. The soft glow of the wing reflected faintly in the dimmed cabin, and the occasional beep from electronics or rustle of blankets was the only sound besides the steady engine drone. The boy sat quietly, holding his model plane in his hands. His mother, finally relaxing, leaned against the window, her eyes closed. The world outside seemed infinite, and for a moment the boy let himself forget the earlier mockery. He felt a strange mix of calm and anticipation, as if he was on the edge of something important, something that would change how people saw him. The businessmen across the aisle were unusually silent now. They whispered occasionally, glancing at the boy, but their previous loud confidence had vanished. The air in the cabin felt different. Even without saying anything, the boy could feel that something was about to happen. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom again. This time it carried a hint of warmth and a personal tone, immediately drawing the attention of the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain, last name again. I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone very special on board today. My son is flying with us for the first time on this flight. He is seated quietly in the cabin, observing and learning. I couldn't be prouder." The words hung in the air. A hush fell over the passengers. People began to glance around, trying to spot the boy. Some whispered quietly to their neighbors. The businessmen across the aisle stiffened. Their jaws tightened and their hands froze mid-motion. They had spent the flight mocking him, thinking he was timid, shy, and insignificant. Now they realized he was far more than they ever imagined. The boy's face flushed with a mix of pride and nervousness. His hands gripped the small model plane tighter. He could hear murmurs ripple through the cabin as passengers began looking in his direction. Some eyes were curious, some respectful, and some tinged with the realization of their own judgment. His mother leaned over and whispered, "See, I told you people often judge too quickly. They don't know who we really are." He nodded, swallowing a lump of emotion in his throat. "I didn't expect them to know," he whispered. "They know now," she said softly. "And they'll remember." The flight attendant who had been checking on them earlier gave a small nod of recognition. She smiled gently, as if acknowledging the quiet confidence she could sense in him. The boy looked at her briefly and returned the smile. Meanwhile, the businessmen across the aisle were shifting uncomfortably. One of them finally whispered, "Wait, the captain said his son?" His tone was low, almost incredulous. The other nodded slowly, his mouth tight. "Yeah, I guess we really messed up." They couldn't meet the boy's eyes. They had laughed at him, made jokes, and assumed he was timid and unimportant. And now they realized they had been completely wrong. The boy wasn't just quiet. He was the son of the man keeping them all safe in the sky. The same man they were trusting with their lives. The boy's mother watched him closely, seeing the mixture of pride and humility on his face. He didn't puff up, he didn't brag, he just sat quietly, calm and composed. That was the thing that made people respect him even more. He didn't need to prove anything. His quiet presence said everything. Passengers began whispering to each other, some pointing discreetly. "Did you hear that?" one said. "He's the pilot's son." A few others leaned back, nodding with a newfound respect. The boy kept his gaze steady, focusing on the little model plane in his hands, feeling both proud and shy at the attention. The captain spoke again over the intercom, his tone warm and steady. "I've always believed that confidence is quiet and strength is calm. Today my son is showing all of that to you in his own way. Please extend your kindness and respect to him as he experiences his first flight." The cabin went completely silent for a few seconds. The words had weight. Passengers began glancing around, and even the men across the aisle shifted awkwardly in their seats. Their earlier laughter and mockery had completely vanished. They had underestimated him, judged him without knowing him, and now they understood that they were wrong. The boy's mother squeezed his hand gently. "You're handling this very well," she whispered. He nodded, feeling the warmth of her words. "It's different now," he admitted softly. "Yes," she said, smiling. "People see you differently now. And they should. But remember, it's not about them. It's about who you are." The boy looked down at the model plane again. It wasn't just a toy. It was a reminder of his father, of the skies, of patience and calmness. He felt a strange sense of pride, not because people were noticing him, but because he understood himself better in that moment. The businessmen across the aisle were still adjusting to the new reality. One of them whispered, "We really judged him wrong." His friend nodded. "Yeah, I don't think we'll ever forget this." The boy didn't react. He didn't need to. He knew that real strength didn't require words. The calm way he sat, the quiet way he carried himself said everything for him. The cabin began to relax again. The soft hum of the engines, the gentle glow of the wing lights, and the quiet movements of passengers created a peaceful rhythm. Even the businessmen, though awkward, started to settle down. They didn't speak much, just stared out the window, occasionally glancing at the boy, their respect growing quietly. The flight attendant came by with blankets, checking on passengers once more. She paused beside the boy and his mother, giving him a small, approving nod. "You're handling this beautifully," she said softly. The boy smiled faintly. "Thank you," he replied, his voice quiet but steady. The plane continued through the night, smooth and calm. Outside, the stars shone brightly, scattered across the endless sky. The boy leaned back slightly, holding his model plane, feeling a quiet sense of joy and accomplishment. He had faced judgment, endured mockery, and now, quietly, he had earned recognition, not through words, but through presence and calm confidence. The captain's voice came over the intercom one final time during that portion of the flight. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I hope everyone continues to have a peaceful flight. And to my son, keep learning, keep observing, and keep carrying yourself with the calm strength you always have." The boy's heart swelled. Hearing his father speak to him like that in front of everyone was overwhelming. He felt proud, nervous, and humble all at once. He knew this was a moment he would never forget. The cabin remained quiet, filled with a new energy. People whispered to each other, sharing glances and soft smiles. The businessmen across the aisle avoided conversation for a moment, lost in their own thoughts. They had learned something important without a single argument or confrontation. Sometimes the truth revealed itself quietly, and it changed everything. The boy's mother leaned closer and whispered, "This is a night you'll remember forever." He nodded, a small smile forming. "I think I already will." For the rest of the flight, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. People were kinder, quieter, more respectful. The boy no longer felt judged or scrutinized. Instead, he felt a sense of connection, not just with his mother or his father in the cockpit, but with everyone around him. The men across the aisle, though embarrassed, had a newfound respect. One of them muttered quietly to the other, "I guess we really shouldn't judge people by how quiet they are." His friend nodded slowly. "Yeah, definitely. There's more to people than what you see at first." The boy didn't respond, but he didn't need to. The lesson had been made clear, and he felt at peace. He continued to look out at the sky, watching the stars twinkle, the clouds glide silently below, and the wing of the plane shine faintly in the soft cabin light. He felt calm. He felt proud, and for the first time that night, he felt completely seen. Not for being quiet, not for being shy, but for being himself. The journey was far from over, But in that moment, the boy understood something important. Respect, understanding, and quiet strength were more powerful than words. The passengers on that plane, the businessmen who had laughed at him, and everyone else would remember this night. They would remember the boy who carried himself with calm confidence, who had faced judgment with quiet grace, and who had earned recognition without a single boast. The plane continued to glide smoothly through the night, each mile bringing them closer to their destination. The boy sat quietly holding his small model plane, feeling proud, calm, and ready for whatever came next. The truth had revealed itself, and the world had taken notice. The plane began its descent. Outside the window, the darkness of the night was slowly giving way to the faint glow of city lights below. The hum of the engines felt steady and comforting, a constant reminder that everything was under control. The boy sat quietly, his hands resting on his small model plane. He could feel the excitement in the air, a mixture of anticipation and relief among the passengers as they realized they were nearing the end of the journey. The cabin had transformed completely from the tense atmosphere earlier in the flight. People were calmer, more patient, and attentive. Even the businessmen across the aisle, who had spent most of the flight mocking him, now sat silently, clearly reflecting on what had happened. They no longer looked at him with ridicule. Instead, they cast furtive glances that carried respect, and perhaps a touch of embarrassment. His mother leaned closer and whispered, "You're handling this so well. I'm proud of you." The boy nodded slightly, a small smile appearing on his face. "I feel different now," he admitted softly. "Like, people see me differently." "They do," she said gently. "But that doesn't change who you are. It only shows them what they didn't notice before." The flight attendants moved through the aisle, giving final checks to the passengers. They smiled politely at the boy and his mother, as if silently acknowledging the quiet strength he carried. One of them paused briefly and whispered, "Your father must be very proud." The boy's chest swelled. He had always admired his father, had always tried to follow his example, but hearing someone else recognize that connection made it feel even more real. He gave a quiet nod, feeling a mix of pride and humility. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, calm and steady as always, but with a warmth that made every word feel personal. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach. Thank you for flying with us today. I also want to once again acknowledge my son, who is flying with me tonight. He has shown calm, patience, and observation throughout this flight, and I couldn't be prouder of him." The boy felt his face flush. Even though he had been prepared for the announcement, hearing it now in the presence of everyone on the plane was overwhelming. He kept his eyes on his hands, gripping the model plane, and tried to focus on his breathing. His mother gently squeezed his hand, giving him silent encouragement. The passengers turned their attention back to the view outside. The city lights were growing larger, illuminating the horizon in a soft golden glow. The plane descended steadily, cutting through the night sky. Some people pressed their faces closer to the windows, marveling at the view. The businessmen across the aisle exchanged quiet words, their earlier arrogance gone. One muttered, "We really misjudged him." The other nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the boy. "Yeah, he's nothing like we thought." The boy didn't look at them. He didn't need to. His calm demeanor, his quiet confidence, and the recognition from the captain said everything for him. As the plane lowered closer to the runway, the engines shifted slightly, the subtle roar filling the cabin with reassurance. The passengers leaned back, some gripping their armrests, others closing their eyes. The boy stayed perfectly still, calm and composed. He had seen his father handle far more complicated situations with grace, and he mirrored that calmness effortlessly. The landing gear extended with a soft mechanical whir. The lights on the runway stretched out, guiding the plane safely toward the ground. Passengers could feel the anticipation rising. Some whispered nervously, others smiled quietly, and a few glanced at the boy, now fully aware of who he was. The captain's voice came over the intercom once more. "We will be touching down shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop. Thank you for your attention." The plane's wheels met the runway with a gentle but firm touch. There was a soft vibration as it rolled forward, brakes engaging and the engines adjusting to slow the descent. Applause erupted in the cabin, spontaneous, genuine, and heartfelt. The passengers clapped for the smooth landing, but also for the journey they had just experienced together. The boy exhaled slowly, a deep sense of relief washing over him. He had managed the flight calmly, endured judgment, and now he felt a quiet pride that was hard to describe. His mother squeezed his hand again, smiling proudly. "You did wonderfully," she said softly. He looked at her and nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It feels different. Like I'm seen." "You are," she said, "and not just for this flight, but for who you are." The plane taxied to the gate, engines humming softly, passengers preparing to disembark. The businessmen who had mocked him earlier looked noticeably subdued. They had been loud, confident, and self-assured at the beginning of the flight, but now they carried a quiet humility. They avoided eye contact with the boy, but it was clear they had learned a valuable lesson. One of them finally whispered to the other, I think we should apologize." His friend nodded, still looking a bit awkward. "Yeah, we judged him too quickly. We didn't know." The boy didn't hear them, nor did he need to. His focus was on the view outside, the lights of the airport, and the calm feeling in his chest. As the plane came to a complete stop, the seatbelt sign turned off. The captain's voice returned, warm and personal. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your destination. On behalf of the crew, thank you for flying with us. I hope you had a safe and pleasant journey. And to my son, thank you for being a wonderful passenger tonight. I'm proud of you." The words carried weight, and the boy felt a mix of pride and humility. He glanced briefly at his mother, who smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. Passengers began to gather their belongings. Some offered polite nods and smiles toward the boy, recognizing him now in a new light. Others whispered quietly, pointing subtly. The businessmen across the aisle shuffled awkwardly, one of them finally clearing his throat. He leaned slightly toward the boy and said quietly, I'm sorry. We judged you unfairly." The boy looked up at him, a small smile forming. "It's okay," he replied softly. "People often don't see the whole picture." The man nodded, a mixture of relief and humility on his face. "We'll remember this." The boy simply nodded again. No anger, no boasting, just calmness, the quiet strength that had always defined him. As the passengers began to leave the plane, the captain was visible in the cockpit doorway. He stepped out, uniform crisp, smiling warmly. His eyes met his son's, and he extended his hand. The boy rose from his seat and walked toward him, a mix of excitement and pride in his steps. They met in the aisle, and his father hugged him firmly but gently, the kind of hug that said so much without words. "I'm proud of you," his father whispered. "Thanks, Dad," the boy replied, his voice quiet but steady. The passengers looked on, some smiling, some whispering to each other about what they had just witnessed. The quiet boy who had flown unnoticed moments ago now stood with his father, the pilot, and it was impossible not to see the pride, the calm confidence, and the bond between them. The businessmen stood aside, giving space, and one of them finally said softly, "That was impressive, truly impressive." The boy didn't respond. He simply stood next to his father, calm and collected. His mother joined them, smiling, and they walked together through the aisle toward the exit. The small model plane still clutched in his hand felt heavier somehow, not with weight but with significance. As they stepped into the terminal, the bright lights of the airport greeted them. Passengers continued to exit the plane, some giving polite nods and smiles. The boy felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not for recognition, but for having faced judgment, stayed calm, and remained true to himself. His mother looked at him with pride. "You've learned something important tonight," she said softly. He nodded. "Yeah, that people often don't see the full story, and that calmness really does matter." His father smiled, ruffling his hair gently. "And never forget, strength doesn't always need to be loud. Quiet confidence can change everything." The boy smiled. He felt calm, proud, and seen. The lesson of the flight had been learned, not just by him but by everyone who had witnessed it. The passengers, the businessmen, even the flight attendants had seen something extraordinary. A quiet boy who had carried himself with grace, composure, and strength, and whose presence had changed the atmosphere of the entire plane. They walked together through the terminal, the boy, his mother, and his father. Outside, the night was quiet, the city lights twinkling softly. He felt ready for whatever came next. He had faced judgment, endured mockery, and now emerged not just unscathed but respected. And in that moment, he understood fully what his father had always said. Real strength, real confidence doesn't need to shout. It speaks quietly, clearly, and everyone notices it in time. The boy glanced at his father one last time, a small smile on his face. "Thanks for letting me fly tonight," he said softly. His father nodded. "You did more than fly. You learned what it means to be calm, patient, and confident. I'm proud of you, always." As they walked into the airport, leaving the plane behind, the boy felt a new kind of pride, quiet, steady, and lasting. The world might judge quickly, but he knew now that truth, patience, and calm strength always revealed themselves in the end. The journey was over, but the lesson, for him and for everyone who had witnessed it, would stay forever.